Okay, I think we'll get going. The attendee number seems to have sort of stabilized a little bit. So let's get going with today's live QI webinar. Just going to kick off with a few bits of housekeeping, actually, as yeah, it looks like a few other people are still joining. Firstly, introductions. Hi everyone, my name is Jason Williams, part of the live QI team, and I'm going to be leading today's webinar session. And then joining me on the call is my colleague Sophie Harris, who you'll hear from a bit later. She is looking after kind of the chat and the Q&A side of things. She'll be sharing some useful links throughout today's webinar in the chat, so please look out for those. We'd also love to hear from you in the chat. If you just want to kick things off by saying hi and kind of which organization you're representing, it's always useful to see where people are joining from. If you've got any questions during today's session, ideally post them into the Q&A. If you can find that option in the webinar kind of menu, but if you can't, then feel free to just post them in the chat, and Sophie will do her best to pick them up from there. Yeah, if those of you who haven't joined a Zoom webinar before, it's a webinar rather than a meeting, so we can't see you, we can't hear you. You do need to use the chat or the Q&A if you want to sort of interact with us. That makes sense. And then lastly, as you probably saw when you joined, today's session is being recorded. You'll get an email in 24 hours time with a link to the recording. So you are free to drop off early if you need to do so, or free to share that link with colleagues tomorrow when it comes out, if you need to or want to. Okay, I think that's it in terms of just some basic housekeeping. Just sort of recap kind of the agenda and the subject for today. In this session, we're going to guide you through chartering an improvement project, showing you how to set up your project for success, essentially. Learn how to shape a powerful aim, appropriately categorize the project, bring the right team together to accelerate that process, and hopefully try and avoid some of the traps that often derail projects when it comes to the chartering side of things. We're also going to look at what makes a good charter in practice, some real examples that we've seen, and also then how to build out a charter in live QI. So without further ado, we'll get stuck in. We've got about half an hour today. This is the first time we've run this webinar, so the timings are a bit of an experiment, but we'll see how we get on. First topic that we want to cover is all around crafting an aim statement. This is a big part of that chartering process, often the bit that gets talked about or a lot of time gets spent on. So we're going to kick off kind of with the aim statement. The bit on the right-hand side of this slide, making it smart, we'll come on to. That's probably the bit, again, that most people are sort of familiar with. But before we kind of launch into the framework for an aim statement, wanted to concentrate a bit more on what kind of why it's so important and ways of kind of making sure you do a good job of that. The first point we've got up there on the left, what are you trying to accomplish? Might seem like a fairly obvious question when it comes to the aim statement. It's kind of the aim is all about clarifying what you're trying to accomplish, but really just trying to emphasize the importance of the aim statement in a couple of for a couple of different reasons, really. One is about setting the scope of the project. A really good aim statement helps you set that scope, makes it clear what the boundaries of that project are, kind of what's in scope versus what's out of scope. And it's often quite dangerous to be a bit vague with that aim statement because it then becomes unclear, well, what should we be doing, addressing or tackling in order to, as part of this project? And it can lead to confusion kind of later in the process. So being super clear about what it is you're trying to achieve really helps later on in the project. It helps sort of set expectations for those that are involved in the project and those that might be affected by the project. So we certainly don't think you should rush through creating a quick aim statement and getting into the nitty-gritty of the project. The more time that is taken to really clarify and discuss and map out that aim statement, the better, really. And in terms of how to do that, the second point we've got up here on the slide about team and stakeholder input. Anyone who's run one of these projects before knows that it's very much kind of a team effort, a team sport improvement. And that starts right from the aim statement. You want to involve, to some degree, as many people as possible in helping shape that aim statement, because if they are either part of that core project team or they're going to be impacted or affected in some way by the project, the more that they can provide some input early on to shaping the scope of that, the more bought in they're going to be to that project, the more helpful they're going to be as part of that process, because they're on board. They felt like they've contributed, they agree with the aim, they're clear about what that aim is. So it's a really good opportunity to build buy-in from the early on in the project process, but also to seek kind of multiple viewpoints. Often the people that are really close to the particular issue at hand might be slightly blinded to what the art of the possible is, or they might be a little too ambitious about what they can achieve. So having multiple viewpoints, either from the direct kind of project team or from those slightly wider sort of stakeholder set, can be really valuable in making sure you don't over or underestimate what might be possible in terms of the scope and the solutions available. So yeah, really big emphasis on having multiple people involved in this process. And then the kind of obvious bit when it comes to writing an aim statement is to make it a SMART aim. And we've listed out the different parts of that acronym on the right, and I would imagine a lot of people are familiar with that, so I'm not going to kind of bore you with too much detail about that. But one thing to be clear here, if you haven't really used this before, is it's not about writing an aim statement that's got kind of 5 individual parts to it. This is more just a general framework or a checklist to think of things to think about when you are crafting that aim statement, basically. So making sure that it is specific, it's clearly defined, what that outcome is, and that that's measurable, and that measurable element is included in that aim statement. So it's those sorts of things, making sure. Often one of the bits that gets forgotten about is the time-bound bit. It's quite easy to leave that bit out of the aim statement, but it's useful for that not to be hidden somewhere else in the project or just part of the timeline, to be very upfront about the time bounding of the project, how long you expect this to take. So yeah, we won't labour the point there, but that's a very useful framework, and we'll see that played out as an example or two a bit later on. We'll move on now to categorising your project, which doesn't seem like kind of the most interesting or important bit of the sort of chartering process, but actually it is really important. So we did want to include it today as one of the agenda items. And what we mean by that is often you are asked to kind of categorise or link or associate your project with various parts of the organisation or various themes or work streams or priorities within the organization. And this is really important. I'll talk about how we typically see people categorizing it and then why we see that is important. The most kind of common, the most obvious one is we've labeled it as departments, really linking your project to the relevant parts of the organizational structure. It might not be a department, it might be service line, a directorate, a division, however your organization is structured, making sure that it's clear that your project is associated with that department or that business unit or whatever it might be, is really helpful for the kind of the reasons that we'll come on to. It's often a visibility and reporting thing, but that's kind of the most basic form of categorizing this project, linking it to the right part of the organization. Next one, called it sort of theme or work stream. This one's almost a bit vaguer, but this is, if there's a particular clinical area or clinical theme that you're focused on, if you're doing a project on pressure injuries, for example, then categorizing this as a pressure injuries project is really going to help other people discover it. If they're looking for projects that fit that sort of theme, they're going to find your project if you can categorize it in that way. When it comes to how do you categorize these things, that's often going to depend on how your organization captures these projects, whether it's in a particular bit of software or not. We'll come on to how we do that in LiveQI. In LiveQI, the example here would be tags. You would tag it as a pressure injuries project, for example. The other sorts of themes, work streams that we've got there, benefit type. So this is things like, is this a cost improvement project? Is it a patient safety project? Is it operational efficiency? Those sorts of things. Often organization wants it kind of categorize what sort of a benefit or impact is this project going to have, and so there's options for doing that. Or it might be other things. This is a very NHS example, but the CQC domains. So if you've got some kind of external third-party accreditor or assurance provider, then are there certain ways in which you need to capture or categorize what you're doing for the kind of reporting and auditing purposes of some third party? CQC domains being a fairly obvious one in the NHS context. And then lastly, but by no means least, kind of the priority or objective. So does your project link to one of the organization's improvement priorities or improvement objectives, those sorts of things? If it does, it absolutely should be linked into those. And if it doesn't, then it's often a bit of a red flag for people involved in these projects, why are we concentrating on changing something that doesn't marry up to what the organization has said is, these are our priority areas. So if you have got that link, make that link. And if you haven't, then perhaps calls into question the project or the scope of the project to some extent. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. And on the right-hand side here, a bit more about why we're doing this. It sounds very just like, oh, it's for reporting purposes. We're kind of helping other people, that sort of thing. And that's true. It does help other people find your project if you kind of categorize it kind of correctly. And also a lot of it is to feed into the reporting and governance sort of processes that the organization's running. So on the face of it, it doesn't sound like it's going to be that helpful for the actual project team itself. But we find that it is because you need to do those things to provide visibility of your project in order to get the kind of the support and recognition that you need and that you deserve, basically. If you're doing something really great, something innovative, something that's making a big difference or could make a big difference, then often that's only really possible because of you need support from other stakeholders, you need recognition of what's being done, you need people to kind of champion that. And that comes partly from the categorizing of the project, the providing visibility, feeding into kind of various governance processes. So yeah, this isn't just a reporting task. This actually becomes a real benefit to the project team if it's done well and it's done properly. Moving on through. So we kind of got the aim statement. We've categorized the project. One of the next important topics is we're at assembling the team. A few different points we want to cover here. Firstly, just the different sorts of roles that are involved in these sorts of projects. You've got kind of the obvious things like making sure there is a designated project lead, and you've got some good core team members who are going to kind of take part in the project. But there are some other roles that you definitely want to consider. One of the, if not the most important one, would be kind of the sponsor or executive champion. Again, like I said, these projects, they're kind of a team effort. They are about changing the way the organization operates in some fashion. And you need people to help with that because you're changing behaviors, processes, governance, things like that. Often the kind of change that you're looking to bring about, particularly if it's going to be sustained, can't purely be done by that core team. You need some senior sort of top cover to help influence other staff or other departments to get things changed, to get people on side. And so having a clearly designated sort of senior sponsor or executive who is not necessarily part of the core team, but can kind of provide some of that top level cover, help you get extra support, help you get extra resources, help influence others, becomes hugely beneficial and can be a massive barrier to success, particularly long term if you don't have that. So definitely consider that. Number 4 on our list is kind of the clinical leader or subject matter expert. You may already have this within your kind of core team, but if you don't, is there someone who's got some deep expertise, kind of technical sort of expertise in the area that you're looking to change that you might need to bring in? They might not be, again, a core team member. You might not expect a lot of time from them, but are there those specialists or those experts out there in the organization or externally that can provide some good subject matter expertise to help with kind of defining solutions and things like that? And then lastly, assuming that your sort of QI or improvement isn't your day job, can you get the support from a quality improvement coach or advisor, someone in the central improvement team who can provide some expertise when it comes to improvement methods and tools and techniques and things like that? Often those people, again, can be invaluable in keeping you kind of on the straight and narrow in terms of making best use of the time, using the right kind of tools to bring about this sort of change. So yeah, a few different sorts of roles to have a think about when you're building that kind of that team, basically. And then the 2 other points we've got under that on the slide. Again, this all seems fairly obvious, but it's just about spending a little bit of time up front thinking about roles and responsibilities and time commitment. And a lot of this is about helping manage expectations or being clear on expectations. So if you've got that team, are they clear on what their responsibilities are? Is everyone clear on who's going to do what? Because if you're not, that will soon become apparent later in the project when you're not making as much progress because people are unsure as to who should be doing what. So some fairly basic understanding of people's responsibilities as part of that project team is definitely worth the small amount of time up front that it takes to clarify that. And then equally, the sort of what kind of a time commitment how much time can people realistically contribute to these sorts of projects? Because for most people, it's not their day job. So, if you're factoring a really aggressive sort of aim, something really quite ambitious and a short time scale, the people involved have the time to deliver on that in a fairly short time frame. Do you need to extend that time frame? Do you need to change the scope of the aim and things like that? Making sure that the time availability marries up with the kind of the scope and the time frame of the project, again, is important. And then on the right hand side of this slide, looking a bit more outside of the core kind of project team, who are the other stakeholders around the organization that might be impacted by the work that you're doing? A useful way of kind of categorizing this and listing them out is the sort of framework we've got up here, the RACI framework. So you're looking for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, basically, and you can come up with a matrix where you label different kind of job roles or people's names and fit them into those different brackets, basically. So there you are inevitably going to need the involvement or the input, or need to consult people outside of that core project team if you're going to actually deliver, not just come up with a new way of working for something, but actually implement that and sustain that kind of longer term. That's where that kind of wider or impacted stakeholder set becomes truly important. So being clear about who those people are up front and have kind of correctly sort of categorized them is really important. Okay, got a few more points before we kind of dive onto the demo part of today's session. So if you do jump in, if you've got any questions so far you want me to sort of pause on, but if not, I will carry on.
No, you're good to carry on, Jason.
Cool. Okay, we've been through some of the main points we want you to think about when it comes to chartering an improvement project, and now sort of looking at it from the other angle. What are some of the common pitfalls? And most of these generally speak to the things that we've covered already, but it's kind of like the flip side of, well, if you don't do them, what might happen? First one we've got up here is the sort of vague or overly broad problem statements. A lot of this comes back to that kind of the clarity about what is it you're trying to achieve and being clear about what the actual problem is and the root cause of that problem. And this might emerge through the course of the project. So you're not necessarily going to have a very clear aim or even a very clear understanding of the problem at the very outset, but it is something you need to keep working on, refining and updating and documenting, because if it is a bit vague, you're soon going to find later on that people aren't quite clear about what they should be doing, and the team will be off addressing slightly different issues that don't necessarily all contribute to your understanding of the aim. So being really clear about that aim, being really clear about what the problem is and what the root cause of that problem is going to save a lot of time, because it's going to stop you from doing things that aren't really within the scope of the project or what you thought was the scope of the project. And kind of related to that very much is the lack of measurable objectives. And here, the two sort of main types we talk about in terms of objectives or kind of the measurement side of things will be the outcome measures. So it's more like that, what's that marker of success and how are you measuring that, and being as clear and quantifiable as possible about that. But also, what are the markers of progress along the way? What are the process sort of measures? So what can you measure before you get to that end result that's going to give you an indication that you are on the right course? So typically the process measures. If you're not clear about what they are, or you struggle to get hold of that data, sometimes it can be difficult to know whether you are really making progress towards it, or you think you're making progress towards it. Trying to take some of the subjectivity out of that. Measurable objectives for both process and outcome side of things are very important. Weak sponsor support. I kind of mentioned this briefly earlier, particularly when it comes, you might get through the kind of the testing sort of phase of the project, think you've got a really good solution to the problem. When it actually comes to then implementing that and making that stick longer term, that's often where the sponsor support becomes really valuable, because at that point you're looking to change the way certain parts of the organization operate, whether that's the way people do things, processes, behavior, governance, all these sorts of things have to change for that project's results to stick. And often you need senior support to make that happen. Otherwise, all of that good work in the project is going to quickly fade away if you can't really get that kind of embedded. So whether it is during the project or just when it comes to sort of sustaining the change, weak sponsor support is often where these things can fade away. Overpromising is always a tricky one. People can be quite ambitious when it comes to what they think we're going to be able to achieve with limited resources or with the time you have available. So being at the outset, being clear about how much time have we got, what resources have we got, how much control or influence do we have over this particular process that we're looking to tackle. In most cases, you're better off almost under promising or starting small. If you can achieve something smaller, you can then probably look to try and scale it up. You'll get more support and buy-in that way than kind of over promising and under delivering. So it's kind of being a bit cautious about the scale of the ambition there. And then a slightly more subtle one, but failure to update the chart as the project evolves. As I mentioned briefly earlier, like you don't know everything up front. Often things do change, but you might sort of narrow in on the aim or need to slightly pivot and change the aim, get a bit more understanding of the real problems, those sorts of things. What you've captured at the very outset of the project isn't necessarily going to be true partway through or towards the end. So it does make a lot of sense to come back and kind of revisit and update that charter, because if other people then start to see your project or join that project, we want to make sure that they are they are reading, if you like, the most relevant and up-to-date information rather than just what you thought 6 months ago when you first started the project. So kind of be aware of that as well. Okay, and then the last point on these slides before we dive into Live QI, because we're racing through the time here, is just a couple of examples of kind of a good charter and a not so good charter, and how some of the points that we've raised so far bear out when it comes to some of these examples. So as you can see, there's more text in the good charter, but at the same time, it's not very wordy. It's not super detailed. It clearly hasn't spent sort of all day writing that. It's marginally longer than the weak example, but yet it's so much more helpful. It's so much clearer. There's specifics in there around things like the aim statement. We're not just reducing waiting times. We're reducing it from 75 to 45, making it very clear what the current state is and what the future state is. Time bounding it and things like that. So you can see if you read the example on the right hand side, you've got a vague idea of what this project is about, but it's really not that helpful. Whereas everything on the left hand side is just that extra level of detail, which if someone's joining the project or might be impacted by the project, that much more helpful. So it takes a bit more thought up front, but it's really not that much more to write essentially. Now, we don't have long left, so I'm going to jump into Live QI now and start to show you how we do that within Live QI. I assume some of you have probably done this before, but a few of you at least won't have done that. So I'm just going to show you, when you first log in, you land on your start page. To come in and create a charter, we need to create a new project. Hopefully I'm still logged in. Yep, I'm still logged in. So I need to click into the projects menu item on the left-hand side. I've already got a fair few projects in here, so that's what I'm seeing, my projects. But if you don't have any projects or you want to start a new project, it's Start a New Project button up here in the right-hand corner. You click on that, take a second, but it's going to load up this sort of project wizard, basically, which guides us through a few steps to go to create the project. I have to complete this process for the project to be saved. But this process, these steps essentially take us through the charter kind of steps that we've just been talking about. So I have to give the project the title. That was the field was all red there, showing that it's a mandatory field. I have to give it a title before I can progress and do that. But then most of these other fields that are gray, they're not mandatory, so I can skip over them. And I'm not going to bore you by watching, you don't have to watch me type into all of these. But you can see we'll work through steps like the problem statement. You've then got a decent amount of space, you can write out kind of problem statement here. Once you've done that, skip next. What are we trying to accomplish? Again, the points that we touched on earlier in today's session. So things like the aim and the rationale. Useful to point out, we've got these little I buttons, little information buttons. They are kind of what are called tooltips. So if you click on one of those, it will give you some information, some hints and tips on what to write in this particular field. So in this case, because I've clicked on the aim statement, it's giving me some guidance on how to write an aim statement, the things that I need to think about. So generally aligning with that SMART aim framework and some examples of kind of good and bad examples, basically. So you've got that for the aim statement, you've got that for the rationale field, things like that. So if you're not sure, they're super helpful and provide you some of that guidance. Yeah, come in here and write out that aim, write out that rationale. This is only the first obviously the first opportunity to capture this information. Doesn't matter if you skip over it or it's not quite right or it's not finished. It can be draft. You can come back to it later. I'll show you that in a minute. I'll skip over those bits. When it comes to the team, by default, LiveQI is going to put you on it because you're creating it, and it's going to set you as the lead user, and it will automatically link to your organization as well. I can come back later and add more team members, but I've also got an opportunity here to add more team members. So if I click on invite new members, I'm going to see a list of the people that I frequently add to projects, but I can just search the whole database here for other names and they'll pop up. Or if the person I want to invite doesn't already have an account, they don't appear in the list, then if I click on can't find someone, I can punch in their email address and it will send them an invite to join LiveQI and then to join the project subsequently. But if I was going to invite Sophie, for example, to join this project, click on her name, and then I can kind of pick and choose her role. I'm going to make her the sponsor. I can control the permissions she's going to have on the project, and then I click add. I want to stick her on the project as well. So you can see that she's sponsor, she's got edit permissions, and she's showing us ready to invite. So she'll get an email once I've finished this process. Get through that. Categorising the project. So we talked earlier about tags and about priorities. If your organization has already got some improvement priorities set up on LiveQI, click link a priority, you're going to see that list of priorities. This one's to do with operational efficiency, just click on that. You can see in the background, it's kind of appeared on this pop-up here. So I can add it to multiple, but that's how I'd kind of just add it to that particular one. Tags works in a similar sort of way. So this might be where I'm going to classify the sort of the different clinical themes or whatever it might be that I'm working on. Click add a tag. I've got the tags that I use most commonly appear here, so I can easily add those if I wish to do so, or I can search the database of tags that already exist, or I can click can't find a tag and create new tags should I wish to do so. Click on one or two of these just to show they will then sort of appear in the background. So that's now going to help. This project would then appear in any reports to do with the CQC domain for SAFE, going to appear in any reports to do with improving operational efficiencies. And then a few basics here. When's the project starting? When is it going to end? When do I expect it to end at least? So pick from the calendar. Free text, type in the location. Where is this project taking place? Can be helpful as well. And then last step, just to click create the project. So that was kind of that chartering process encapsulated into a few steps there. As I say, you work through that. You don't have to fill out all of those steps. You can come back, they can be draft, you can kind of come back to them later and update them. But that's the project created and saved on LiveQI. So you can see the title of it there. I can see the information that I've already added now appears down here. If I want to make any changes to that, I just click edit and all these fields become editable. So I can come back and actually fill out some of these fields later. But I've now got access to the rest of the project as well, the drive diagram, measures, etc. All of these pages are now accessible, and I can access them also through this kind of glance panel as well. So that was a fairly quick run through how to go about chartering a project in LiveQI. We've got a more detailed webinar running in 2 weeks' time, I think it is, that will take you through that. Let me jump back to the slides. I think I've got it on the last slide. Yeah, starting a project in LiveQI, that webinar is running on the 23rd of September. During that session, someone will walk through that chartering process a little more slowly. And then once they've done that and created that project, they'll take you through every page in that project as well and talk you through how to populate each of the different parts of the project. So if you want a more detailed walkthrough, do sign up for that one. Also, just some of the other ones that we've got up here, other CoffeeTime QI webinars that we've already run. All of those are available on YouTube. So if you search for LiveQI on YouTube, you should be able to find those. And you can sign up for any future webinars that we've got, liveqisystem.com/webinars. Now, I think we're basically done with our half an hour, right on time, hopefully, Sophie. But yeah, I'll throw it back over to you. Have there been any questions, any comments, anything from you to add in?
No questions. Just lots of thank yous for a great webinar, which is brilliant. And I would just like to note that I have been posting some super helpful links throughout. So to our webinars, so you can sign up to them, to our improvement hub, as well as our help centre. So do go in and take note of those links as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, thank you, everyone. That's everything we were going to cover today. As I said, you'll get an email in 24 hours' time with a link to this. So do look out for that and feel free to share that more widely. Hope everyone's enjoyed that, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.